morning, everybody. Hope you're all set for today's episode where we're taking a different look at it, I suppose. We're taking a different approach. We're going to focus on how elections themselves, so a bit political, but not political, how elections themselves can shape the job market, recruitment practices, how you do your job, everything really relating to that sphere. As Ger was saying to me before we went live, four major elections happening or have happened this year?
I suppose in certainly our sphere of dare I say influence, 4 elections this year. We've got obviously we're just off the back of a presidential election in the United States. We've had European Union elections in June. We have had a general election in the UK over the summer. And this day next week, we'll have an Irish general election. So I think it's a timely opportunity to sit down and have a little bit of a chat around, well, how do elections and politics and all that kind of good or bad or whatever else stuff, and the economy and job seeking and the implications for job seekers, how do they all link up and join up together? That's what we're about today, I think, is it?
I think so, because like even if you're not in the country that these elections are happening in, particularly the bigger ones with the most influence, we'll say, with businesses and things, it can have a knock-on effect on how it impacts the job market across the world, I suppose. And there have been a lot of so again, we're keeping it very general. There's no stances happening or nothing. It's not a political broadcast. So if anyone has questions on any of that, then we won't be answering them. So just, gotta throw that out there. It's one of these topics where we're very cautious, I think, as well, aren't we? Like of how to go about it. But I suppose one of the things, I guess, that we were looking at was, because it's a big thing in Ireland, is which attracts businesses from across the world, is the corporation tax and things like that. So wasn't it you were saying something about the current president of the United States and his policies and things? Because we did say we're hitting on policies and how that impacts the job market. So
well, the incoming president of the United States, I'd say his name is Donald J. That's where we go, right? At the moment, corporation tax in Ireland, the European Union, is 15%. And what the incoming president and his incoming administration would have said they would like to do is to match that rate over in the United States, which is fine. It's perfectly within their right to do. And the idea there is that they're trying to they're hoping that some businesses that have maybe were born in the United States but have relocated to and are headquartered in places like Ireland might come back. And furthermore, what they're hoping to do, or what they're saying they might do, is to actually put tax or tariffs on exports from the European Union into the United States. So the impact then potentially on that, we'll say in Ireland, where we have a population in the Republic of Ireland of, say, about 5 million people, maybe about 2 million people at work, give or take. I don't know what the exact figure is, but like if those American companies were to close their doors in Ireland tomorrow, that would impact about 200,000 jobs here. So it's a big section of the Irish economy are suddenly looking kind of around going, well, what are we going to do here? So I suppose one of the things that, like you and I are all about job seekers and helping people on the job market. And what we're trying to, one of the things that I want to get out of today is to try and kind of ask people to say, look, you know what, if you're out there and if you're working in Ireland and you're thinking you might think you're in the safest job in the world, and I don't want to be going to go doing doom and gloom. Maybe you are, but perhaps it's time that you kind of start maybe brushing up and thinking, well, what could happen in my role in 6 months' time, in a year's time, or in 5 years' time? There could be, nothing to worry about. But at the same time, you know, I suppose from my own experience, I worked in a job for the Guinness Storehouse in Dublin, really, really successful visitor attraction up until 2020, and it was pretty much perceived to be as safe as it possibly could be. And next of all, there was a shock that came along, and in the shape of COVID-19, and the whole landscape for people in my industry changed, and there was a lot of people were no longer working in hospitality, and certainly that affected the business I worked in, and it also affected businesses throughout. So I think today what we need to kind of get across is, well, how can people insulate themselves a little bit against potential shocks that might be coming out of changes in the political and economic landscape.
Yeah, and we will at the end, I think, give some tips and ideas as to how to be as you said, be ready for any potential things. But it means also that you need to be you don't necessarily, but being aware of what's happening around the world is important too, because especially if you're in a specific industry or a niche industry or something like that. But just like on the like, for example, corporation, we were talking about taxation in general and corporation tax I know was one, but the impact of, for example, Brexit, that was a big election that happened a few years ago now. It was
I think it was 2016
like
actually.
It happened, but then it officially, but it officially happened about, because it took a while, obviously, for it to actually come about and all that stuff to happen. But with that, jobs then, the jobs that you're in shifted with regards to your awareness of what you had to be mindful of. If you're in Ireland, for example, shipping things to the UK or the EU to the UK because of import taxes and export taxes and customs charges and legalities of products and things like that. So again, now it may not have been a major shift, but it could have been, depending on the size of the business, and it could have been additional things that some people may not have been able to handle, because the way you're just sometimes in a job and you're like, oh no, I like the way that is. But that awareness is important too, so that you're not just sending something or whatever. It's just, again, little things like that, I think, are important.
Absolutely. And I think, as you say, as you rightly say, in 2016, the British people decided to leave the European Union via the referendum, but it took a long time to kind of sort out, well, what would that actually look like? And here in Ireland, in particular, bone of contention was around the Northern Ireland Protocol, which was really only kind of sorted out. Some would say it's not recently, sorted out yet, over the last 12, 18 months, and look at how many different changes of Prime Minister there have been in the UK in that time. I've looked, 3 or 4, I don't know. About 3 or 4. Yeah, there's a few, a lot of political. So I suppose there was a fair degree of political instability in the United Kingdom for a long time, and then you throw that into the political sensitivities around Northern Ireland as a whole and the different communities there. But one of the things that meant, certainly on the island of Ireland, is that, well, the Northern Ireland executive, it wasn't the only reason, but for many reasons it shut down for a long time, so that Northern Ireland was being kind of administered more or less directly from London, and it meant that budgets didn't get signed off, investment wasn't there, and it was kind of in a state of crux, and I think a lot of my friends, and you're from closer to the border than I am, Lorraine, so you might be a little bit more familiar with it, but a lot of my friends will kind of say, the difference between working and living standards and the economic outlook for Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland were night and day, and literally it's not that big of an island,
Yeah, polar opposites, and that's just how policies can shape. I'm just bringing it back, Ger. How policies can shape how people work and what benefits, because the legal system is different in the UK. Not too much now, but there is some differences with employment legislation in the UK compared to Ireland, you know, around maternity leave or absences, public holidays as well. You know, so there's a lot of little shifts. Not that it matters, but it does if you're, let's say, in the Republic, crossing the border to work in Northern Ireland. It's kind of like the nuances of Brexit in Ireland, on the island of Ireland was actually, I think, most important. And I, because like there were people I know who were in the like born in the mainland Europe, living in the UK, and then Brexit happened, and then they're like, do I need now to get a visa? Do I need to get a visa to be able to work in the UK and all of this? And they're thankfully they don't, because they're in Northern Ireland, and I think because they've lived there a long time. That's another thing people need to think about as well. Like, you need visas, I know, for EU, but like, do the mainland Europeans need a visa for the UK because they're not in the EU now?
You know, I think that there are complications there. I know, again, people that know me will know that I'm a big football fan, which is something that you've come to know recently. And Manchester United appointed a new manager recently, and the guy is from Portugal. Ruben Amorim is his name, and he was supposed to start work last Monday, but he couldn't start work last Monday because he had to go and get his work permit sorted out, and there was a delay in the work permit. Like, you know, it is an example of kind of a manifestation that people kind of link into, like, you know, all they have to do is open up their newspaper and go, oh, the guy didn't start United last week when he should have started, like, you know. Interesting that you're kind of talking, you mentioned there around sickness and stuff like that in the UK. One of the things that I did come across recently while I was preparing for this episode was that long-term sickness in the UK, people who are kind of classified as being off work as sick in the long term, it has never been as high as it is now. There's about 2 million people, I believe, out, and that's coming, I think, from the UK Statistics Office, that are out on long-term sickness at the moment. Like, you know, so I suppose there's a change of government there in the UK over recent months, and they have a stated policy of getting overall employment to 80% of the 80% of the possible working population there, and like, you know, so they're bringing in kind of like a lot of things like flexible working policies, health and employment initiatives. They've established a labour market advisory board and things like that. Like, you know, so I suppose what I'm trying to kind of latch onto there is to say, like, you know, well, actually, you know what? There's things there that are happening in the political realm that can actually affect, you know, the job market, and, you know, for better or for worse. I don't know how effective the policy, the new government's policies are going to be, so I'm not making a call on that. Like, you know,
but I make changes to, like, employment, as you just said there, the legislature, which is the whole point of government, right? So and you know, while things are in place now and people aren't going to change what's already in place, you can't amend things. Like, there has been, and we're not getting too legal, don't worry, we're not a political broadcast, but we're not going legal either, just from my knowledge. You know, what's there is there, but they always amend these laws. You know, it's important, I suppose, to see how those who are in government deal with crises and crisis around the world. So, like, one thing that we both, some people listening may not have, you know, been aware of, but we were, and it's the global financial, I know there's been a few, but the most recent was the one in 2008, the global financial crisis. And that impacted the world. Like, of course it did, it was global, but like, I feel that how governments deal with that is important, and how policies they put in to challenge it. And I guess that, will we start with your experience of how that may have, like, impacted your work?
For those of you that, you know, don't know, I'm a few years older than Lorraine. Okay, I know I don't look it. I know I'm still wearing it well. But let's just say we're from different generations, maybe. You know, I'm kind of the tail end of Generation X. Okay. Okay. And so I suppose when I came out of university the first time, anyway, it was around the turn of the 21st century, and it was the tail end of an era where people we're still kind of expecting that they might be able to have a job for life if they had a university degree, or especially in my case, as I had a master's degree. And that was like, wow, this was like, you're set up. And I remember people telling me like, you'll never have to worry about work ever again in your life. Like, and I do remember myself kind of querying that at the time. But anyway, in Ireland, we had, I lived through the Celtic Tiger years. I suppose when I entered university in 1995, things were really starting to turn in Ireland. Things got better. By the time, I came out of university around a few years later, things were really, really hotting up. We had a peace dividend from the Good Friday Agreement and stuff like that in Ireland. And, Ireland really took off in the following years. And I was very lucky that at the age of 24, along with my wife, we were able to buy a house together. Now, no disrespect to anybody that's of that age group now, but I don't think very many 24-year-olds in Ireland could buy a house now. And even then, the house prices and stuff like that were starting to kick off. The crash came along. And, certainly government policy at the time played a part in what happened in Ireland, in that banks were, I don't think I'm going off script too much by saying banks were allowed to lend people too much money. There was a lot of negative equity problems, and housing and affordability became a very, very big issue. Work-wise, as I said, I was very, very lucky to be to work for a very, very good company that looked after us really, really well. And there were, there might be somebody that pops up and says, but Ger, remember this. But there were little or no job losses certainly on the permanent side of the company that I worked with. So that was, they insulated us, really well. Now, there were, pay freezes and recruitment freezes, and we had to be. I remember the word frugal being very, very important in our lives in terms of how we spent money as a business and stuff like that. But by and large, we were able to navigate our way through that kind of 5-6 year period and come out the far side and still be fairly kind of comfortable as a business. Now, it certainly took its toll on people financially. It certainly took a toll on people, perhaps in their health, if I'm honest with you, because, there was less resources available to people. Our business would have relied a lot on temporary or casual staff, and the budget for them wasn't there in the way that it had been before. So people are doing more work and stuff like, so people are a little bit kind of certainly burned out a little bit by the end of that cycle. But our jobs, by and large, were still intact. And, I have to thank Guinness for looking after us in that way. And really, it was kind of later on when COVID and stuff like that came along, there was, another response. But I suppose around that time, Lorraine, you're coming up a little bit behind me, and you probably had a different experience of that period. So do you want to tell us what your experience of that period was?
Jeez. So just on that as well, when I was 24, I was not able to buy a house either. So when I came out, so in 2008, that's when I finished my leaving cert. So I went to college at that time because honestly, there was nothing going anyway. There was no real jobs. You had to go to college. There were apprenticeships and things, but it wasn't as it is now. Not as accessible. But also, I was only 17, so I couldn't really go. I don't know if they go for 17-year-olds, but if you were an apprentice, I think 18 it would have been the number. But anyway, not that I wanted to go, but I'm saying there wasn't a lot of opportunity with regard to not going to some sort of third level at that time. And so I went in college, and I came out and I had a bachelor's, and I went in again and I got a master's, and it was 2012 when I properly finished my university experience. And it was still very much uncertain with regards to jobs at that time, because it lasted about, I would say, 3 years, that crisis. Wouldn't it have been?
I would say, I would say that I kind of probably started to see bits of recovery 2013, 2014.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
but
So yeah.
still, things are still not great. Like, don't be.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
even then, there was still very much a lull with employment and things like that, because you had to still budget, you still had to manage the resources effectively and things. So it was a bit of a dire time for a lot of people. But one thing that the government did have was JobBridge program. And I don't know, you're probably a little bit familiar with it, Ger.
Yeah, I know a little bit about it, but it wasn't something that we engaged with where I worked, so I didn't have to know about it, to be honest with you.
So the JobBridge program was an initiative set up by the government to try and lower the number of people unemployed in Ireland, right? So it was an opportunity. It was, in a nutshell, it was an internship program, but it was not a paid internship program. You got a little boost on your social welfare, and you did go in, you worked 30 hours a week, you still did all the work, but it was an internship program at its core. And you could have done a 3-month, 6-month, 9-month contract. It depended on the businesses that were opting in for it. So I went and did one after college, and I'm very grateful because I got to work in not far away from home. I got to work in Donegal Town, and I worked with IBEC. It's like an agency for small businesses to outsource human resource assistance and industrial relations assistance, which is the legal side of it, trade unions, negotiations, going to hearings, doing all that stuff. So it's kind of like a little, it's an outsourced.
Yeah, I think it's the Irish Business Employers Confederation, if I recall correctly. And it's like the representative group for private industry.
And I enjoyed it because it was somewhere I really wanted to work, and I got a lot of experience. I got to go to, JobBridge was great. Got a lot of experience, but didn't get a job at the end of it because there was no job going. So I was like, okay, fine. And there's still no real jobs going for me. I didn't really want to move to Dublin. I did have interviews and things, but in human resources, if you wanted to get a job, you had to go to Dublin or Cork, really, to get experience. And at that time, because not all businesses had jobs still. But anyway, I did another JobBridge. That got me to where I am here now in Sligo. Again, I did it for 9 months, no job at the end. Now, I did send feedback on it. And the problem with this initiative is that, and because Ger shared an article with me, and I'll allude to it now, but it was a way to lower unemployment rates. Because when you're on the JobBridge program, you're employed. You're written as employed, not unemployed, even though you're paid through social welfare. So it kind of skews the statistics of the unemployment rate.
Yeah, what you feel is that, whatever the unemployment rate of the day was, well, it wasn't accurate, perhaps, because, at the end of the day, you weren't being counted as unemployed, but for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
You were being paid through social welfare, and it felt like you were.
Yeah, but the one thing is, and I know this might sound like I sent this as feedback, so it's okay to the JobBridge people, but this is part of the government policy in that it was abused by businesses. Like the Gardaí started using it for 40-hour work. Shops down the road, delis and things like that, 40-hour work, and you're not getting paid for the work, and they're busy jobs, and you shouldn't have, and you should always give the job at the end of it. Like the job was there clearly, but they used JobBridge because they didn't have to pay them a wage, and that's the gripe I have with that particular thing when I was growing in through that whole thing, because it demoralizes you as well when you're doing the work for so long, and then you're not actually employed by them. It's like, okay.
But at the same time, you could be, and I know I'm not going to name them, but there is a very prominent nationwide retailer who went through a period of redundancies around that time, and I know that they kind of reorganize their business model, and they used a lot of JobBridge staff in frontline positions, we'll say. So there might be a little question mark there as to whether or not they were genuine redundancies. But would I be able to ask, if you did a JobBridge company with a JobBridge placement with a company, could they then rehire you again?
Yeah. So they could. So you could have 2 contracts, but you couldn't do more than 18 months in total. Yeah. You only could do 2 internships. But the thing is that I don't know if there was any kind of stipulation, because I might be the only unlucky one, but I know a friend of mine who did do JobBridge and she got the job at the end of it, and that's the way it should have been. That's the way it should have been. If they're worried about whether or not you could do the job or whatever, it didn't matter, because after that you didn't have to hire them. They were on probationary period, basically. And
I suppose there's
you
kind
had
of
the job after that term.
Looking at it from a business's point of view, maybe it's a thing that they have to take people on with the intention that there would be a job there, and maybe the job wasn't there at the end, and look, really sorry, there's nothing we can do and it wasn't there. But I think what you're alluding to is actually, the job was there, but they decided to go another way because it suited.
They have to apply to get the job, to get on JobBridge, all of that, and it's kind of I don't know if they even, after, with regards to them assessing the company, whether or not they asked after that to see how many have you hired in, and I don't know. It's just one of those things that I just had a gripe with JobBridge. That was all. It wasn't the businesses I worked with, because they were great. I loved working there, learned a lot of experience. It was the initiative that the government at the time brought in. I'm bringing it back, And there's a lot of those type of initiatives nowadays.
Yeah. And I suppose, I'm just even thinking, that's obviously a government scheme. But one thing that businesses do, I know I've seen it in Ireland. I know it definitely happens in the UK. I'd be fairly sure it happens in the US as well. Is this fire and rehire kind of thing, whereas you've got maybe somebody on a short-term contract, you might have them there for 6 months. There's, I think once you hit, in Ireland, I think the last time I looked, it was 48 weeks of consecutive employment. You kind of more rights start kicking in terms of the security of your employment. So people's contracts at the end are a little bit sooner than that. And then next of all, 6 months later, they'd be back to be hired again. And another short-term contract, it's kind of like a hire and refire, or fire and rehire. And I know, in fairness, the new government in the UK in October has brought in an employment rights bill to modernise protections for workers and stuff like that again, and that's one of the practices that they're really looking hard at banning. And I know in Ireland that's something as well that we're really looking at. There's a lot of talk around how things like 0 hours contracts are managed and so on and so forth. Again, I think in the UK there's 1.13 million people on 0 hours contracts. That information is coming from the CIPD. For anybody that's looking to see that, they brought out a report last week. It's there on their website. So again, this is kind of things that, perhaps when election time is coming, and if this is something that's in your sphere of kind of interest and it might affect you, and there's politicians knocking on your door and asking for your vote, well, maybe these are things that, you might consider kind of asking or investigating. Well, what's your party's policy on this kind of thing? What are you going to do? What's out there in the public domain? What have they said? So without wanting to influence the way anybody votes, maybe that's something that people might want to think about.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah,
it is important, because it's not just about economics, and it's not just about politics. It's about well, actually, it is about economics. If you don't have supply, if you don't have demand, then you won't have, a job, basically. And you know what I mean? You can have all the supply you want in the world. So I think that's also another thing was, I know this might not be related to government as such, but it's sort of in a tangent of the adaptability side of things. And I think you alluded to it with COVID, with your business things and tackling that, but that remote working side of things. And obviously you can't really force businesses to have completely remote working policies, but I think it's important that everyone recognizes that the working environment, the job environment is changing. Like it's more dynamic now. It's because of COVID. Like if COVID didn't happen, I don't think anyone would have even thought about remote working to the extent that it is now, honestly. But I think it's a matter of that adaptability, that people need to be adapting to the environments that they're in. And it kind of just relates to what you said at the start, you know, being job ready or CV ready, that type of thing. You know, the adaptability is important.
Absolutely. And I suppose, like, you know, I don't buy into the theory that COVID was just a big whole worldwide social experiment, like, you know, but I suppose people had to change the way they work really, 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 really quickly. And for by and large, a lot of people liked working from home because they had to, like, you know, and to be honest with you, I know in the early part of COVID, oh God, in my job, like, you know, I have been, I would always try, young kids at home and other things and whatever else in my life, I'd always try never to bring work back into these four walls, like, you know, because it was at the time that I was at home and with my family, and that was my balance. And especially, like, you know, I was working on a lot of shifts and weekends and stuff like that, like, you know, so when I was here, I was like, you know what, I'm here, like, you know, I want to be present for people. Whereas COVID, you know, we were all working for the most part, unless you're in the frontline industry or whatever, or healthcare. But a lot of people were working from home for the first time, and they were actually finding that, you know, whatever about work-life balance, this kind of work-life blend was emerging, and they actually kind of really liked, you know, being, you know, I like to be able to go for a run first thing in the morning without worrying about my commute, and then coming back on and logging on to work and doing what I had to do. And yeah, it might mean that I worked a little bit later at night sometimes, but you know what, I could take a long lunch or whatever, like, you know, and people like that, but it doesn't always suit, like, you know, at the end of the day, I would always have been very much about good things happen when people get together, and it's very hard to replicate that. For me, it's very hard to replicate the dynamics and the energy of 2, 3, 4 people in a room. Now, that may be me conditioned by the type of work that I've always done. Yeah, I think that, like, you know, people had to change really, really quickly, and now that companies kind of want people back in a little bit more. And I think there was a case in Ireland recently where there was a TikTok employee took TikTok to court, and I think they lost their case actually because they weren't allowed to that they actually weren't allowed to continue remote working. But, like, you know, it's about really being very, very flexible.
Yeah, like I mean, I'm very much I do enjoy, like, I used to work above an internet cafe, and I really enjoyed going into the office because I'm a person who you know what, it just gets me out of the house, because when you're self-employed, you don't really have that office environment. You don't really have people to banter off. You do. I mean, we're bantering now, Ger.
Yeah.
That's not what I mean. But it's more like, it's more like in a real sense, you don't have anyone other than yourself in a room somewhere. So when I was going to the office, I would have had clients potentially coming in or people asking about this, that, and the other. And, you know, it's dynamic. And I enjoyed that. So then when COVID hit, I was like, I mean, I adapted. I don't mind working from home. But initially I was very much, I miss the office, because I just like to it gets me out of the house, if I'm honest, Ger. Like, it got me out of the house, you know, and just to go for a walk. I go for walks, but I mean, it got me out of the house to you know, I'm not in the house working. Yeah. Like, that's my home, and then the office is my work kind of thing. But obviously I can compartmentalize now, but it's very tough for some people, you know. It's very tough for certain people who are so used to working in that environment to then have to tackle technology, tackle, you know, things that they feel is not needed in their line of work, which sometimes it may not be. And it's that it's more that mind shift of things. And I think that, again, policies could come in with recruitment, and as you were saying there about 0 contract hours and things. So there are certain things that could change, and companies aren't obliged to. No, they are and they aren't, but they're not obliged to make something fully remote if they feel that actually, one day in the office will benefit people. You know what I mean, or benefit them.
Yeah, well,
I think it's not.
Well, one thing that came out in the lifetime of the last government here in Ireland is that workers in Ireland now have the right to request remote working or flexible working. Now, having the right to request that, and the it's only a start, because the business has a right to say no. And I don't think they have to give. I don't think the threshold for saying no is very high. They don't have to give very many reasons for it. And there are some instances in some jobs where it's it might make sense for everybody. And when you're looking at a time where recruitment is important, recruitment and retention, especially retention, is a big challenge for businesses. As I said at the start, there's the idea of a job for life, or even staying in the same sector for life, is gone. So people's eyes do kind of look and go, right, okay, well, I work in IT now, but there's a job over in pharma that, I think I could do that job with the skills that I have, So, obviously organizations are looking at ways to make their, to extend the lifespan of an employee in their organization, and remote working or working from home is one of those things, But I think one of the things that also came to the fore really with the recent pandemic, and also I'm thinking about, again, back to if American companies in Ireland decided to just pack up and go home in the morning, there's kind of skills shortages in a lot of markets, because I think that if the big multinationals left Ireland tomorrow, our corporate tax take would collapse tomorrow morning, and there'd be an awful lot of people who are qualified for certain roles.
Oh yeah.
That just aren't there in the economy anymore, but they might not be qualified for anything else. So the idea is kind of that lifelong learning thing, so me leaving college at 22, 23, whatever I was, back in 99, 2000, and the idea that my education was done, for a lot of people, they think their education was done, whereas actually, do you know what, maybe your education isn't done, and just keep it up, keep plugging away, because you don't know.
For a lot of people, education never existed, in that they just, they did their secondary school or high school, and they then went straight into a job, and they've been in there, and they've, progressed, and now they find themselves, I actually have to learn about, let's say, digital stuff or technologies. If again, that lifelong learning kind of thing, it's sort of, you may not have to, but it's always good to just keep yourself aware of.
That's the thing, and I suppose, the team that I worked on in Guinness, for by and large, was a front-facing team, and as you said there a couple of moments ago, that a lot of people didn't have to have a very high level of tech capability, but then next of all, something like COVID came along, and we were all, what we did in our business was we put a big focus on training, and we were trying to roll that out remotely and getting people access into learning platforms and stuff like that, and without wanting to put, without wanting to run anybody's skills down, a lot of people that worked on the team that I, was leading, they didn't have the skills to do those things, even logging on and finding their details and finding their online profiles for whatever platform it was, without the assistance of somebody like a manager kind of standing over their shoulders, and a lot of people found it really, really stressful, and it was really sad to see. But then I suppose they all came around eventually, with a lot of support, a lot of talking through, what to do. But then one of the nice things that I've seen, and I think her name is Debbie. She was somebody who would have needed a lot of assistance on my team with with the online stuff and with the digital stuff. She left the business, she left the storehouse business, and she went back to college. And the first thing she did was she upskilled herself in the areas of IT so that she could be really, really competent. And she went back and she retrained, and she went, and I think she's working as a pharmaceutical technician now for one of the big chains, like, you know, and she uses IT in all sorts of ways now, like, you know. So it's a real kind of a real eye opener, like, you know, of, but actually, do you know what? Even sometimes people kind of might think, that's not for me now. I'm a bit too old. I'm a bit too long in the tooth for that. I'm not going to, you know. But actually, do you know what? Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. But the best thing to do is to kind of get out ahead of it early, and to try and kind of keep monitoring your skills, whatever skills they might be, digital or business.
And that's important too, to monitor. Just again, bringing it back to some, you know, where we were talking about the type of businesses that are attracted into Ireland in particular because of our corporation tax. You know, the type of businesses that are in Ireland are pharma. There's a lot of pharma, a lot of medical device. There is a lot of tech, and online, like digital media companies. Those would be the main, the bigger ones. But is there any other type of industries, like hospitality as well? You mentioned to me like before the call. You know, that's still big. And hospitality isn't just, it doesn't have to always just be, going in and being a waitress or something. Hospitality is quite big. It's a big industry. You can go in behind the scenes. You can go in the front line. You know, like there's a lot of those would be the three key industries in Ireland.
I think so, yeah. I think so. And I'm going to stand on, I'm going to take a moment to stand on a platform to talk about my home industry, what I would call, which would be hospitality, and which has really, really, really suffered through in the last number of years for loads of reasons, okay? And even before COVID, like, hospitality is really struggling to attract people at the moment. And there was the article I sent you last night, it was from jobs.ie, I think. And it said, there's 700,000 extra hours worked in hospitality in 2024. Now, that sounds like, well, that's an awful lot of people. Like, you know, that equates to about 350 full-time equivalent jobs, okay? I can tell you right now that there's more than 350 full-time equivalent jobs being vacant in the hospitality sector. But it's a great sector to get into because, as you say, you learn, you know, the first skill that you'll always learn is about people. But there are, like, you know, I've seen people who came through different hospitality businesses that I've been associated with, and they might have started out in a front-facing role, which is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. It's really, really, really important, and it's what Irish hospitality is famous for. But, you know, they've become accountants, they've become bakers, they've become business managers in different sectors, because you get you get exposure to all different sectors of, or all different parts of running a business.
But wasn't there a thing recently where people were striking or protesting the government because of some sort of, was it tax or costs or something?
So if we're talking about the same thing, which I think we are, a lot of businesses, a lot of, certainly restaurants, and a couple of high-profile restaurants have gone out of business this year, and they are struggling because of, and they would say that they're struggling because of the VAT rate. The minimum wage has gone up in Ireland, so they're now obliged to pay. And then there's the way pension contributions are structured as well. They have to pay towards employees' pensions, all of which are, you know, they're quite, you know, on the face of it, perhaps they're quite progressive measures on the part of the government, like, you know, that they've brought in. But at the same time, then, like, you know, well, what supports are there for businesses to kind of implement them? And then one of the things that we've seen, certainly the cost of going out for a pint or a dinner or a lunch in Ireland has skyrocketed, unfortunately, in recent times. Now, there's still very, very good quality out there, but, like, you know, and I think what you're alluding to is that the employers groups have been protesting outside Leinster House. Every time you hear my former colleagues from ITIC, the Irish Tourism Industry Confederation, on the radio, they're talking about the VAT rate being a little bit high, and they're looking for a special rate for the hospitality industry. And I think they're all valid claims. But one of the things that I would have seen certainly in tourism, and this was even before the challenges of COVID, is that the younger people coming up through, they're not so much interested in those front-facing hospitality kind of roles anymore. But the likes of, they don't want to work for Google, they want to work for TikTok, they want to work for Facebook, they want to use their language skills, because nearly everybody coming through University in Ireland nowadays will have a language of some description. And so, whereas it's great to say that we've got, the lowest levels of unemployment in the history of the state, that doesn't mean that there aren't challenges in certain sectors, and that some sectors are crying out for labour. Other sectors then, basically, if you want a job in Ireland, you can have one, as far as I can see, but it might not be the job you want, because there's an awful lot, if you look at the global thing, where the last couple of years in tech and pharma, kind of layoffs there, so you might not always get the job that you're qualified for. And it's certainly, I know that I worked with somebody in England, two people in England recently, one of them first-class honours graduate in mathematics and struggling, and you'd think that boys would be, biting the hand off. I'm talking about local things, but there are global things at play there behind them, which is, I suppose, the whole point of this episode today.
That whole thing about the lowest, you said the lowest unemployment rate in the history of the state. If there are certain schemes and initiatives that are in play, like CE schemes and things and all that, and I don't again, if you're on those, you're kind of not employed or unemployed, because you're working on something else, you're doing something else. So again, it's not a true, my opinion, is not a true representation if there are people on those initiatives, and they're great, they are great initiatives, not doing that. I just feel they need to be done a bit better. If you really want to have that figure as true, as fact, and also I think, as you were saying there could be people on the books, as in they could be working 2 hours, and I think the age range of the article that you sent was 15 to 64 years old. And so, if you're that age, 15-year-old, 16-year-old, you can only work I think at least 4 hours, maybe up to 6 or something in a week. So you can't actually, so it's sort of, they're still employed though. So it's not like, it's sort of, what are they classifying as unemployed? Is it, if you're working 2 hours, you're fine, you're employed? Or is it, okay, the threshold is 12 hours or more, then you're not classed as unemployed? You know what I mean? So I think it's just a matter of taking those figures with a bit of a more wider,
I think that we have to interrogate those figures a little bit. I'm often on a soapbox in my kind of, again, another time. Yes, I am often on my soapbox about carers and waiting lists for treatments and stuff like that for kids, as people will know. And one of the things that I find kind of interesting is the certain manipulation of figures without going completely off topic, by certain government or certain political figures, shall we say, to make things look not quite what they are. I'm going to leave it on that one, because I'll get into I'll be getting very, very cranky.
No, don't worry. I just because again, it sounds like, if anyone's lasted this long, I in all fairness, I think from my perspective in relation, now we've talked about a lot of things, which is great. Actually, we've covered, I think, a lot. We're touching the surface with this one, but I think with me, my biggest thing was the initiatives to get people out of unemployment, and them maybe not knowing exactly how to properly enforce it. I think, because I got 2 of them, and I love doing what I'm doing now, but that's not the point. It was more, I was doing it to try and get into, to work in a business and stay there, to have that job for life type thing. But if we're going to have these initiatives, they need to be thought out properly, and maybe means tested and properly feedback taken on board, things like that. Nothing that I said today is not what I said. I said exactly the same thing in the feedback that I sent them years ago. So it's not like I've changed my mind or anything. Again, it's not the businesses I worked with. It was the initiative, the program itself. And that is partly down to who was in government at the time, us to structure that and to make it, that's just my key thing. Obviously other things, but that was in case people were listening, that's what I was talking about more so with regards to my views, my views on something and the government. But anyway, just thought I'd throw that in there, Ger. What's your key takeaway, I suppose? What's your key?
I think there's a couple of things, right, that I suppose to say again, without being harbingers of doom and gloom, I suppose, if you look at something like LinkedIn, only 10 to 15% of people who are on LinkedIn, of the billion people that are on LinkedIn, actually actively engage with LinkedIn every day or, every week or whatever else. The actual engagement rates are quite low. So that's a fairly that says to me that there's a lot of people out there who only really come to that platform. And it's not the only way to safeguard your working future or to network or whatever else. But I think it's a fairly good barometer that, they only really come to a platform like that when it's time to change jobs or when they're interested in changing jobs or, if there's something happening, right? It's always a good idea, I think, to have all your job seeking tools ready. Kind of start pulling together a CV every couple of months, and updating what you have, document your achievements. Every time you have a performance review, try and get, the metrics and what you've done well, actual results, you increase something by 10%, so that when it comes that, perhaps you might, of your own volition decide it's time to move on, or you might have a shock to the market like COVID or like the crash in 2008 and 9, and you have to move on, that you actually have a CV ready to go and that you're prepared and that you're ready to enter the job market and you're a little bit ahead of the pack. Okay. I suppose skills, keep your skills fresh all the time. No such thing as a job or a sector for life anymore. So that concept of lifelong learning, and overall just watch what's happening in the world very, very carefully and how that might impact your sector and the world of work. And that is what I came here to say today.
Yeah, just on that, I had opportunities available, even though it didn't follow through with it. I think take advantage of initiatives, programs, or jobs. Just if you are looking for a job, just take the job. Just take it, just to get that experience. I'm not saying to take any job. I'm saying if there is a job that you are interested in and you know that you can get the job, then take the opportunity, especially if you want to break into an particular industry. You're not going to get, you may or may not, I'm not saying you aren't, but you may or may not get what you are looking for. But if you have that industry knowledge, you're more than likely then to get that if it comes up again, type thing, So it's more like holding out hope for that dream job. May or may not come around, but it's more political environment and the economic environment does shape how many jobs are available and recruitment practices and things like that. So, that's kind of what it is. Take opportunities as they come. That's
it. And if I was to just add one thing on, I did a CV for a graduate or an upcoming graduate this week. And one thing that I would say is have a look at internship programs, have a look at the placements that are made available to you through your college, because sometimes I get a sense that people don't take them as seriously as they might, whereas it's all experience, and it might not, you might just be going in photocopying the minutes of the meeting. And read the minutes of the meeting. You might learn something, while you're photocopying them. And it's getting that exposure. Talk to people who are in jobs or in the sectors that you want to be in. Learn what it is about, and what can you do to kind of learn? What can you do to learn from them? Take those, take every opportunity that comes your way, but be a bit strategic about it. Don't think, right, I'm on a placement now for 3 months in this company, sure, that's grand, I don't have to worry about college assignments or whatever else. Well, actually get in there and kind of make a name for yourself, because you don't know what's coming afterwards. And if anybody out there is looking and that might have a little bit more knowledge on a particular market or a particular situation than we do, by all means, post that stuff up to the JobtalkJava page as well, because we're not professing expertise here. We're just trying to reflect what we see.
Yes, these are our observations, our experiences. So we do encourage participation and engagement. We'll leave it at there. at that. And sure, yeah, we will see you again
We
for
will.
our next episode, which will be every second Friday at 11 o'clock Irish time.
And do tell your family, do tell your friends. Give the Job Talk Java page a follow. You'll see it on my profile, you'll see it on Lorraine's profile, and you can click through it. So 2 or 3 clicks will do the job.